the conversation going and bring in some of the initial observations. Shereen, do you want to bring the microphone a bit closer to yourself?
I don't think anyone in this room would disagree that grassroots is an inherent part of Manchester's art ecology. I feel like what's missing is a level of mentorship and of guidance for local artists to help them with funding applications, to help them promote themselves and how to be a sustainable organisation. We're living in such a funding-dependent world at the moment, and I'm getting a bit scared that artists are becoming a bit too grant-dependent. An initial point when I was asked to do this panel was that the title of the panel is Culture Comes from the Streets, and I don't want to sound rude, but I don't think any of us come from the streets. And I feel like a panel discussion like this is not going to engage with people who are on the streets and who are part of street culture, because it's not the language that they speak. It's not a panel discussion, we need events. Culture is not just music and discussion, it's food, it's fashion, it's sport, it's so many different things. And that attitude that Dave was saying about they used to do it for themselves, we are still doing it for ourselves, and we are doing it more. We're so resourceful now because we have to be.
Yeah, very good, Shereen. Beth?
Thanks. Yeah, I obviously largely agree with what Dave was saying, and lots of the ideas he's come up with, especially the cultural twinning. I really like the idea of that. Within Boston, rather than having to go to Beirut to do it. I think the word culture struck me actually while you were talking, because the shiny beacons are getting, there's increasingly more and more of them in the city centre of varying different types. But culture is something that grows in a dark and grimy place, sometimes on leftover kebabs, I think, as well. But and it's left to grow by itself, and then takes on a life of its own. And I'd never really put the two and two together, the two different kind of types of, and I say culture about 57,000 times a day, and I'm not entirely sure what we mean by it a lot of the time. And I think that's up to us to decide what we want when we say culture comes from the streets. Like you're saying, the streets, what are the streets? What's culture? What are you talking about? What are we asking for? And it's for all of us to decide, because if we don't, the city decides for us. Devolution in and of itself has happened around a table that none of us were part of carving. And I think we have to get out our own tools and start whittling that table. And that's, Europe has happened where we're out, those decisions have been made for us. There are decisions being made in the city now for us that we should be being part of. And I think that's the conversation we need to be having from the streets as well, is deciding what culture means and what we want to see within the city. I'd like to, I don't know, I guess a straw poll maybe. I don't know whether I'm allowed to do a poll the other way around. How many of you have been out to Moston or Miles Plattin in Newton Heath or Clayton in the past 6 months? Great, simple, brilliant. I really like what you're saying about engagement being both ways. It's outreaches. Yeah. How many of us because you live there? You live in the North Manchester boroughs. That is fascinating. Right. I think I'll finish that.
Okay, what was your point?
That was my point. My point was what you're saying about engagement. That it's not. I can't abide the term outreach. Who's outreaching to who? The cultural institutions are engaging with people to give them what? The cultural institutions can benefit much more from those people and the stories they have to tell, and opening those prestigious spaces up to prestigious stories that need to be told.
Can I?
Yeah, of course you can, Dave.
What Shereen was saying about the idea of culture from the streets, Sheila Delaney worked part-time in a milk depot. She lived in a shitty little house in Salford. She was from the streets. Bernard Sumner grew up in Salford, originally in terraced housing, and got knocked down by the council under some clearance, and lived in a block of flats next to a chemical factory. That's from the streets. Why are we so patronising that the only people who come from the streets are a certain kind of person? The streets is where everybody starts. I mean, some people might live in a country house. I don't know any of them. But I don't, I think it's slightly patronising to kind of say that there's only one definition of the streets, and it's kind of, in our heads I'm guessing it's urban, and it's ethnic, and it's grime. But actually, everyone has things to express, because we live in a society where 99% of people are alienated, where people are doing jobs they don't like, where people are living lives they don't like, in streets they don't like, where they don't feel at home, in neighbourhoods that maybe exclude them. Lots of people. But I totally agree with you that we're becoming too grant dependent. Not just artists, but also the cultural institutions. Because when I talk about the commercial, bringing a commercial element into your work, I don't just mean the artists, I also mean the cultural institutions. Because
I could just give you a couple of facts on that one. In that most of the big cultural institutions in the city will have a portfolio of income that's made up of a third, and a third. So a third will probably be grants, a third will be box office and other income, and a third will be money they raise from sponsors, philanthropists and corporates. So they are quite entrepreneurial, and most of the big ones would be, and I think it's important to say that. Can I come back to some other points?
Yeah, please do, Fiona.
Yeah, I've got quite a few points actually, because I totally recognise the what you growing up as an artist in the city would have come across, but I actually do think genuinely that there's been some form of generational change that has shifted, and the people that were originally the gatekeepers to the big organisations in the city got those jobs maybe in the 70s and the 80s, have tended to have moved on now, and their approach to things was very much, I am the curator of what happens in this building. The funding I get is for me to decide what I put on that the audience then might like. And I think that that mentality has really shifted with the next generation of leaders that have come up through that. And that if you spoke to most of the people who ran arts organisations in this city now, they would have a much more collaborative outlook on how they put together what was in their buildings, and that genuinely they would feel that their building and the way they arranged their building and their artistic policies had to have at their core a responsibility for young artists growing up in the city now. Now, it may not be perfect by any means, but I think, certainly since I was at Contact in about '99 to where I am now, the landscape in this city for developing artists across all art forms has totally been transformed. It's not perfect, it's not totally, I guess, it's not talked about, it's probably not arranged together enough so that it makes sense, and definitely there's much more to do at a younger level to get people even to the point of thinking that they can be an artist or that they can use their creativity. But I do think that that landscape's changed hugely. And I do think that, yeah, of course we all go to cities because they've got a really good edge. Not everybody does, but actually most artists, and this is art, not the whole of the cultural ecology, most artists actually get to a point where they want to have access to the resources that the organisations have. They want spaces to rehearse, they want producing experience, they want access to resources to help them, like all the technical stuff around shows. They desperately want access to audiences. So there's a point when most artists, unless they do something on their own in a very solitary way, most artists who want to put on something for a public to come and see in a performance way will want to have access to the resources that the larger organisations have got. And that's why I think it's important who controls them.
Cool. Yeah, Shereen, and then I just want to raise one point as well, Dave, just to add on to that, is what I was finding myself thinking while you were speaking was, what therefore is the role of the state in this awful phrase which you latched onto, where your glorious leader was derided for using the term cultural provision. But what is the role of the state as an intermediary, as a broker, and at what point do we turn away our gaze from what the Guggenheim did for Bilbao, or what the Lowry did for Salford Quays, or indeed what the corporate sponsors of the Manchester International Festival enable to happen. That was just a few thoughts swimming around. We can come on to those, but Shereen.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to what Fiona was saying. If it wasn't for organisations like Islington Mill, like Contact, like Antwerp Mansion, who are genuinely producing artists and encouraging their development, so many people wouldn't be doing amazing things. It's because those organisations nurtured us, encouraged us, actively supported us, and actively means giving you space for free, giving you space where it's okay to take risks, it's okay to fail, and those kind of spaces are the ones that we need to be protecting in the city, and I'm scared that they're just getting shut down.
Right. Yeah. Beth, role of the state, and then I'll ask Dave to come in, and then I'm going to throw it back to you guys. We can see you all itching on the edge of your seats with your paws going up.
Role of the state, they're not one party state anymore, I think here. We have a little drop of Lib Dem. I don't think it is the role of the state. I think it's all of our city. I would hope everybody would want a stake in the city. Then if you want a stake in the city, then you have to want a stake in helping to design it and be part of shaping it as well. And I think actually the most important people in shaping the city should be its artists. What do we want our experience in the city to be? What do we want the city to look like? What do we want it to feel like? What do we want its soul to be? That comes from the arts and culture. That should come before anything else. That should come before an economic framework in my mind. But it's not seeing the state as this being that does things to us. It's working with it and not seeing it as it, seeing it as people, as officers, as staff who are interested in culture. As you said, Dave, as Maria Balshaw kind of brought down the drawbridge. It was Maria Balshaw. It's not the exec member for culture or the lead officer for culture. It's a human being who's interested in the city and its culture as you are. The council has this very nice Our Manchester term for how it's kind of changing its strategy for the city and the way we design our services. But I like to look at it from a homelessness perspective. I don't know if any of you have seen the homelessness charter, Manchester Homelessness Charter. It's the first charter bar Indianapolis and Wellington in New Zealand internationally that was designed with people from all sectors of society, people who've experienced homelessness, people from the third sector, faith groups, business, the council, everybody equally. And I think that's the role of the state going forward, is bringing that together and bringing that culture together to thrive.
Maybe that's a debate for another day, and maybe I could point, it doesn't seem to be working, but as I said, Beth, it is a debate for another day. One final thing I want to just mention on this. One of the candidates to be the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester, a Scouser called Andy Burnham, said he wants there to be
Hang on a minute, Michael. You are actively campaigning for one of the other mayoral candidates, and it's unfair of you to bring this up at this public meeting.
Okay, well, let me put...
Actually,
You already brought this up on a website that earlier in the week.
I only want you to explain.
And I'm just saying that I think it's unfair of you to bring this up.
in respect to Andy Burnham, can I just say one thing actually? The first politician I heard speak really eloquently about culture and its importance in our world in many different ways was Andy Burnham in Liverpool, and I think he was just made Secretary of State for Culture, and he talks about it and he really gets it from his heart. He understands culture very well.
I only wanted to ask you the question that he wanted to have a cultural charter for the city from the Mayor's office. So what's wrong with that?
I mean, I think in terms of the role of the state, if you talk about the big state, then obviously the Arts Council continue to have a role. Actually, I think that some of the things we're talking about now and concerned about is we're actually pushing in some ways against an open door, because as Fiona says, I think there is a different kind of feel around the generation who are currently, I don't feel that they're gatekeepers in quite the same way as they were. I do feel that there is a change, and the Arts Council is changing. Even today they announced a change in some of the ways that they're doing funding in the foreseeable future, and they're the phrase they used was better targeted support for individual artists, which I think is really important, which is something that they've not really done. In terms of the City Council, it annoys me that official organisations and funded organisations like Marketing Manchester and Visit Manchester very rarely give any profile to stuff that is happening out on the margins. They are so wedded into the mainstream cultural provision. That's just a little tweak that the council could do in terms of finding audiences that would help. But I think ultimately, all of us who are seen, even me, you know, in the way that these things happen, somebody who was once an outsider becomes a member of the establishment, and that is me now, and I'm quite happy to accept that. But I think one of the roles now of somebody my age is to be an enabler, is to be somebody who actually understands that it's important to pass the baton on to younger people or people who are still trying to find their way in terms of arts and culture. That is really important because ultimately it is about a bigger project. It isn't about any single one of us or the cultural institution or even the city. It's about making the world a better place. And we do that by working together and passing on information and being collaborative.
Okay. Right, let's throw it open to the floor. Let's get your points, your questions. I'll take them in different groups. Angelique's got a microphone. Lad at the back, one of our regulars. Samuel, you had your hand up.
When it comes to the idea of what the street actually is, I think it's the root of where we all come from. Our homes, somewhere we feel at home to. And so, when it comes down to culture, for me, it's based on what our identity truly is. So instead of promoting spaces that we should express our culture, I think we should be promoting acceptance of identities, who we truly are. And only then will culture come from. Do you agree? What is culture to you? Is it actually something based on finances, or is it who we truly are?
Okay, thank you, Samuel. Let's take a couple more. Angelique, thank you.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Gemma Williams. I work for the MEN, but I'm not actually here to cover it. I just came because I thought it seemed really interesting. Probably 10, 15 years ago, I sat in an event in the Northern Quarter where Tony Wilson talked to students about the importance of available space to people who are starting out as creative people, the importance of whatever space you can find, free space. It's a little bit like what Andy was saying about the ability to come on and off the dole. That freedom to be able to just take risks in an environment where you're not held to perhaps a rent or whatever. That used to be the Northern Quarter, it has been the Gay Village, it possibly was the Hume Crescent at one point. Where does that go to now in Manchester City Centre, now that so much of it is becoming regenerated?
Dave, did you want to come back either on Samuel's point, or where does culture go beyond what's built to address Jen's point?
I always love it when there's a debate and the first questions are kind of like defining the terms of the debate. I understand why we need to do that, but
We used to adapt.
so the idea for me, culture is how we individually and collectively express ourselves, whether it's through art, or whether it's through fashion, or whether it's through music, or whether it's a haircut, or whether it's whatever it is. That's all our culture. There's things called DJ culture. There's and some of that is collective, and it's about our identity in a community, or it's like our identity in as individuals. But it's about expressing yourself, and that is and I do feel like, you know, a lot of people have a lot of great things to express, and it always I get upset when I meet a lot of people who have not been given the opportunity to express themselves, particularly creatively, because there's been too many insurmountable barriers. And I just feel like it's one of the great shames of the society we live in, that people don't have those opportunities. And what is the other? And I agree with about that thing about space. You know, I mean, hindsight is a great thing. There's lots of things that the city planners could have done over the last 30 years. For example, they could have made sure that all the new build properties were energy efficient. They could have put solar panels. They could have asked Tom Bloxham to build a few more houses for people who, you know, have families even, or old people. you know, people on low income. There's lots of stuff the city planners haven't done right, and I think one of them is that they haven't necessarily always looked after and understood the value of cheap space.
Beth, can I ask you to, as the sole spokesperson for Manchester City Council and therefore answerable to every sin they've ever committed?
I'm not used to that at all. Space is the final frontier, isn't it, in the arts and culture? I'm sorry, I'm such a geek. That's not funny at all. The most interesting argument I've heard, actually, or the most interesting idea, because everybody likes to criticise that artists have been moved out, but the ideas are somewhat lacking in what we do, is an idea around Salford being a production space and Manchester being a promotion space. I'm not sure whether I agree with that or not, but I think it's interesting to maybe apply for community protection orders for spaces like Islington Mill and Paper Mill on Mirabell Street, and some of the more kind of the very production-based screen printing presses and kind of old warehouses that are new mills of industry in Salford, and then promote them in the spaces that we're supposed to have adaptable spaces like the factory, Whitworth in here, and have that kind of model. And there's also some interesting stuff in Finland, and I think there's one of them appearing on Liverpool Road, which is a studio apartment, but it's not a one-bedroom apartment. There's a studio underneath and apartments above. And if they can do that in Finland, I'm pretty sure house prices are quite high in Finland. I'd like to see that kind of thing start to emerge in Ancoats and some of the kind of derelict sites that we see across the city. I unfortunately am not the sole voice of the council. So how that appears is, again, it's kind of open to discussion, but I'd like to hear people's ideas on that, because I think it's still open.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, let's keep the comments flowing. That's great.
In France, I think it was the early 90s, Jacques Long, who was Minister for Culture, defined street art as a mainstream art form, which then meant that street artists, graffiti artists, street theatre got mainstream funding, and that made a big difference to how street art developed over the next 15-20 years. I could say that some of those street arts companies have become mainstream and maybe got a bit tired, but I really think that that decision was really important, and I think one of the problems is that our politicians are so scared of risk because of the power of the media and the corporates and the way that has happened, and that our economic model is broken. So actually, if the Northern Powerhouse doesn't happen, which is a leftover term from the Industrial Revolution, and we're doing move to more of the sharing economy, it could be really valuable. But unless the politicians take risk, unless the people running those institutions take risk, I think the whole ecology really, really suffers.
Well, we remain hopeful. Actually, they're just taking the risk of appointing Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, so we never know. Okay. Yes, another point at the back.
Hi, Dave. I'm old and I live in the city centre, so it's not exclusively young people. But I like what you said about Rochdale, but a couple of things that arise from that. One is, I'm a part-time tour guide. I take around a lot of people who've come to the city, and a number of them have come to see United or come to see City. Very few have come to see Rochdale. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with Rochdale Football Club, but it is a truth that there are elements of consumerism across all sorts of aspects of our life, and some just hit the headlines and have the bigger numbers. When I was young, it was the Beatles and Otis Redding, and there was very strong consumerist elements there, but also elements that made people look at things differently, altered the way we saw society, altered the way those artists and the places they came from interacted with society, and I think they're all quite bound up. The other thing that I was going to say relating to Rochdale was that for many years I was a teacher, not in the arts field, but a teacher in secondary schools in Middleton and Chadderton, and all the time I was seeing a link between the people in the schools and the cultural institutions of the city. There wasn't what we then called outreach in the early years of my teaching, and I'm very glad, despite not liking the term, I'm very glad that it now exists, because it does provide access to skills and equipment and ideas that were not there. But the very same teachers that were taking the students and the children into the cultural institutions were also, on other days, working with the children in the schools to actually engage with the arts in their own way. So I don't think that those are sort of being a consumer and being a producer and tentative producer are mutually exclusive. I think they do go together very, 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 very strongly.
Great point. Let's get the microphone to a couple of other people.
Okay. Something that's absolutely blown my mind. I don't really understand it, but when you think that the government has spent years and years and millions trying to get kids out onto the streets to exercise and do things, and a game called Pokemon that they've resurrected 25 years ago has got kids walking all around playing this game. And you know, culture, where does culture come from? The future culture is probably going to come from the kids walking around playing that game. So, I mean, I'm not technophobe, I thought the mobile phone would never work, and you know, things like that. But possibly something using modern media like Pokemon has is going to create culture for the next 25 years.
Brilliant. Angela, you can just get the microphone down to the front row over there. And please just keep passing the box on. We've heard from lots of councillors tonight. Yes. Councillor.
Various points I'd like to make. I'm going to focus on one, which is actually the role of the state in regard to culture. And I think the issue here isn't about streets, it's about culture and who's defining it. And so I've got an assertion to make that actually those people in charge of culture and the arts have done far less to support the cultural life of this country over the last 40 years than any other part of the state. So I think in the 70s and 80s, the people that made the most contribution to our cultural life was through the dole and through the Enterprise Allowance Scheme and through education, first and foremost through education. Over the last 20 years, it's been through ERDF funding and it's been through regeneration budgets. The person who's had most impact, or we'll look back 20 years' time and say the person who had most impact in between 2010 and 2016 on our cultural life wasn't John Whittingdale, it was Michael Gove.
Through decimating it.
Patricia.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, can you? Yes, right. As a resident of Rochdale, can I say thank you so much for the unlooked for marketing exercise tonight, and I hope to see you at many of our very interesting cultural events in the future, like our book and music and literature events, like our wonderful events at the Town Hall, etc., etc. I could go on, but just come over to Rochdale. You've been told how easy it is to get there. Just a couple of points, please. I was a bit saddened, Dave, when you said there was fear in the sort of cultural community about where we might go now after the Brexit vote. Because I think fear breeds fear, and really what we would prefer, I think what we need to see is more positive views being come forward and say, yes, we can do this, yes, we will do this, yes, we will take forward in many ways, including culture. And just last point quickly, yes, culture does come from the streets, of course it does, but it comes for all of us, whatever our background is, wherever we come from. So, although it comes from the streets, don't knock the other people from the other, perhaps, hierarchies, because everybody's got their own contribution to make. Thank you.
Can I just ask, my friend Mark, who engaged in conversation with me on Facebook this afternoon, could somebody take a microphone to him, because I kind of, it's one of them where we had an interesting discussion on Facebook and I just kind of thought it would be interesting for us to have, if Mark doesn't mind.
Where is he? Where's Mark?
Stick your hand up, Mark.
Mark's holding the microphone.
Excellent.
There you go.
Glad you asked. Okay, I live in Wally Range, in my friend's house, and I don't pay any rent and look after a dog, okay? And I produce art all the time. pay, which means I can't afford a tram fare to go out to Rochdale if I should desire to go to Rochdale. Okay? I've been to Rochdale, I'm from Rochdale, I'm a poet. So, this collection of individuals, I wonder how many are emerging artists. If you put your hand up as an emerging artist. Okay. Are you from the streets? Right. Sorry. And how much did you pay to get in? Emerging artists, did you pay to get in? Because I didn't, because somebody gave me a ticket. Otherwise I couldn't come to this debate about culture from the streets, because I couldn't afford it. And you suggested that it's the same price as £7, same price as a coffee and a cake. Well, I wouldn't pay £7 for coffee and cake. Okay? So my real reason for coming, I wasn't really intending to speak, even though we did start a debate. What I was doing my silent debate was called root shock diplomacy, to force you to consider these issues. But I don't know, I don't think you can really talk about art from the streets until you start going down to the people on the streets and getting their art into venues like home, rather than building great glass pyramids with lots and lots of money, and then not having the actual residents from Manchester allowed to go, not allowed, available to go in there and make the art which you need to see so that you can give it to a broader audience. And the Manchester International Festival, I don't know if you really have that many grassroots artists from Manchester in the festival so that the international people can see us as well. So I find I'm fighting against the lack of money and the lack of interest from people, I mean, to actually come and see what is going on and to take it further. And if you've joined the establishment now, then come on, throw that rope out and let some of us up.
Finally, I would also like to announce the results of tonight's debate. Unless Dave had something urgent to say.
No, I just wanted to add, because I thought you were about to thank the panel and thank everyone for coming, and before you did that, I just wanted to personally thank everybody for coming, because as I did say at the beginning of my talk, I would much rather have DJ'd to you, to be honest, and because I know that the people in the room all had great ideas and great passion for the subject. I knew that you would all be listening with a lot of intent in a way that people off their heads in clubs tend not to. So anyway, thank you for listening, and thank you for avoiding the what I said at the beginning, any kind of antagonism or adversarial way of approaching things, because I did want us to feel like we are, as I said at the beginning, part of a much bigger project.
No, indeed. Thank you, Dave. Well, you'll be pleased to know that your proposition that you put before the audience, before everybody even heard a word that was uttered, 49% of the audience agreed with the basic premise that culture comes from the street, 39% were undecided, and these numbers don't add up. They never add up. But 11% disagreed. No, 12% disagreed, yes, I can read that. The good news is that, well, for you anyway, is 80% of the people in the room agreed with the central proposition that culture comes from the street, 20% didn't. We can all go home as friends.